And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather showing first front here washing out across southern Alaska, Kenai Peninsula area back into the Kuskokwim Valley. Another weak front bringing wet conditions, or continuing wet conditions here along the southwest coast and pushing in toward Kodiak Island. Low pressure, rain and showers here for the southern southeast Bering Sea area, and a weak trough here bringing some scattered rain or snow showers for the Seward Peninsula and about Kivalina on up to Cape Lisburne. Dry over the eastern interior, dry for the Panhandle with light winds. And for tomorrow, mostly sunny, southeast coast on up in toward the Copper River Basin, central northern interior, all the way up to the Arctic coast. And periods of rain here, light rain, fog or drizzle, or all three, for Kodiak Island up across the southwest interior, Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula. And this low actually weakens into a trough, starts to drop southward, keeping it wet for the eastern Aleutian areas. And then everything shifts off to the east and southeast, so mostly sunny and dry, south central Alaska on Saturday. Variably cloudy, isolated showers over the mountains here for the southeast interior areas, and then rain pushing into the southern Panhandle with that trough, or that front. And pretty nice out over the Bering Sea here with high pressure, risk of a shower or two for Adak and Atka, and a risk of some rain for Shimian Attu. Otherwise, for the coastal water forecast, here on the south coast, northwest winds 15 knots for Friday, and west-northwest at about 10 knots for the north coast. Lynn Canal north at 10 knots, variable winds 5 knots. Stevens Passage and the central inside waters, northwest at 10 for Clarence Strait. And then increase in the winds there for Clarence Strait on Saturday. Small craft advisories for southeast winds up to 25 knots, seas building to 10 or to 8 feet. Small craft advisory is also developing here with that front pushing in there in the afternoon, or actually throughout the entire day. Southeast 25 to 30 knots, seas just under 10 feet. In the central coast, east winds at 20 knots, and the north coast, north to northeast winds at just 10 knots. Prince William Sound, eastern North Gulf Coast, light variable winds tomorrow at 10 knots with 2 to 4 foot seas. Western North Gulf Coast, light east breeze at 15 knots and 20 knot east winds for the Barren Islands and Kemishak Bay. Cook Inlet, northeast winds 15 knots. And for Saturday, for Cook Inlet, north to northeast winds just 10 to 15 knots with 2 to 3 foot seas. Prince William Sound, eastern North Gulf Coast, stay in that light wind pattern, variable at 10 with 2 to 3 foot seas. Northeast winds 15 knots for the western North Gulf Coast, and for the Barren Islands, northeast winds 25 knots with 6 foot seas. Kodiak Island, Friday, east-southeast winds 25 knots. For the Alaska Peninsula, light variable winds at 10 knots. Bristol Bay, east winds at 15 knots. And for Saturday, for the Alaska Peninsula, winds northwest 20 to 25 knots, north at 15 for Bristol Bay. Northeast winds here for Kodiak Island at 20 to 25 knots. Eastern Aleutians, west to northwest to southwest winds at 25 to 30 knots, northwest 25 knot winds for Adak and Atka. And then for the western Aleutians, 10 to 15 knot winds, mostly from the west. And then for Saturday, south to southeast winds here for the western Aleutians, about 20 knots, not too bad. Southeast 15 for Adak and Atka Islands, southeast winds 15 knots there. On Alaska Island, northwest wind at 20 knots, but out toward Nikolsky, light variable winds at 10 knots. And for Norton Sound, Friday, east winds at 10 knots, St. Lawrence Island, south winds at 10 knots. Southeast at 10 for the Yukon Delta coast, east at 10 here in Kuskokwim Bay, and north winds 15 knots for St. Paul, St. George, and St. Matthew Islands. Light variable winds out over the Bering Sea on Saturday here, especially for the Pribilofs and St. Matthew Island. And for Norton Sound, light north wind at 10 knots. Same thing for St. Lawrence Island, north at 15 for the Yukon Delta coast, northwest 15 for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, that's where the strongest winds will be, out of the east at 30 knots. Brisk wind advisory is also out for the central and west side for east winds at 25 knots. Chukchi Sea, east-northeast winds 5 to 10 knots. And for the day on Saturday, north winds at 5 to 10 knots with a Chukchi Sea. Brisk wind advisory here still for the western Arctic coast, east winds at 25 knots, but coming down for the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast. Looking at east winds at 20 knots for those areas.